All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to unpack a really fascinating mystery that's just hiding in plain sight, right in the middle of the global rush for rare earth elements. I mean, we hear about rare earths all the time, right? They're absolutely essential for our smartphones, defense systems, green tech, you name it. But the story of where we actually get them is changing fundamentally, and it's taking us to literally the most extreme frontiers you can imagine. To understand why this is happening, we're going on a bit of a journey today, one that starts deep in the Amazon rainforest and, believe it or not, ends up all the way on the surface of the moon. Now, here on Earth, we actually already have well-regulated rare earth producers. Plus, think about this. We generate absolute mountains of reusable e-waste every single year that could easily be recycled. So the big question we have to ask ourselves here is, why bypass all the easy stuff for the nearly impossible? Why are billions of dollars and just an immense amount of political capital being spent to mine what are arguably the most inhospitable, logistically impossible, and legally protected places in the universe? It presents us with this really stark paradox. On one hand, you have places like Araxá. It's right in Brazil's industrial heartland. It has super favorable regulations, state-of-the-art infrastructure, and there are already massive mine tailings sitting there that could supply rare earths. Boom, ready to go. But instead, massive state and corporate efforts are laser-focused on places like Cabeça do Cachorro, which translates to head of the dog. This is a deep Amazonian region bordering Colombia and Venezuela. It's completely remote, it's made up of legally protected indigenous land, and there is absolutely zero industrial infrastructure. None. The sheer logistical nightmare of setting up shop in the Amazonian site is just staggering. Think about how the dense web of paved roads that normally supports industrial hubs simply vanishes up in the northwest. Poof! Gone. Entire regions are totally cut off from the paved networks that make industrial mining even possible. We're talking about places you can only reach by air or by these incredibly long, complex river journeys. So why the sudden push into the jungle? Well, it stems from a major geopolitical shock. The panic that followed the 2010 global supply crisis triggered massive federal budgets in Brazil aimed at reinvigorating geological research. The state officially declared rare earths as, quote, bearers of the future. These minerals became viewed as absolutely essential to Brazil's sovereign development, their technological autonomy, and national defense. Suddenly, the frontier wasn't just this dense forest that needed protecting. To policymakers, conquering it became a matter of national survival. And this panic sparked a really complex territorial struggle. Prospectors essentially dusted off these 40-year-old archives from the military dictatorship era, which pointed them straight to Morro dos Seis Lagos, or the Hill of Six Lakes. It's an area known to have incredibly high rare earth concentrations. But here's the catch. This secret geological formation sits squarely within a biological reserve, which itself overlaps with constitutionally protected indigenous territories in the Upper Rio Negro. This geographical reality has kicked off a fierce debate over who actually gets to control the land and its wealth. On one side, the Brazilian military and state geologists view international conservation efforts not as environmental protection, but as foreign entities trying to lock up Brazil's wealth. As the perspective of a state geologist highlights, the military-industrial complex strongly argues that NGOs basically want to keep indigenous peoples simple and poor, which they see as a way of hindering both local growth and the nation's sovereign power. But if we look at the indigenous response, it completely shatters the stereotype that native populations universally oppose all mining. Listen to the words of an indigenous Tucano artisanal miner, what they call a garimpero. Many indigenous people argue passionately for the right to mine their own lands. They actually see small-scale, locally controlled mining as a crucial way to escape poverty, participate in the modern national economy, and, in their eyes, even help secure the Brazilian frontier themselves. But of course there's a catch. As community members point out, their vision is for sustainable, locally controlled development. They do not want massive corporate extraction. And this dynamic leaves these indigenous miners doubly exiled. They are fiercely opposed by international environmental NGOs who want zero mining whatsoever, and at the very same time, they're dismissed by military leaders and politicians who only want to permit large-scale corporate extraction, viewing the small-scale indigenous miners as obstacles to quote-unquote true progress. The tragic story of a man named Mr. Santos perfectly encapsulates this whole conflict. He's an indigenous leader who found rare earth stones literally just lying on the surface of his land. But under a deeply flawed legal framework, indigenous people only have rights to the top 40 centimeters of soil for traditional farming. Everything below that, federal property. So Mr. Santos and his family gathered some surface stones to sell just to buy a computer for his daughters and pay for his elders' medical bills. He was arrested, jailed for 6 months, and fined for environmental crimes, all for picking up rocks on his own land in broad daylight. It's a stark example of how the current framework effectively only empowers wealthy corporations who can actually afford the massive permitting costs. Now, it's important to realize this isn't a new fight. If we look back over 4 centuries, distant powers have repeatedly used geological prospecting as a tool to try and discipline, conquer, and militarize the northwestern Amazonian frontier. From Portuguese explorers back in the 1600s, to the military dictatorship using radar to map the region in the 70s, all the way to today's rare earth crisis. The underlying goal remains exactly the same: extra-local powers trying to force their territorial agenda onto local communities. And the state uses literally every tool at its disposal to gain control. And yeah, that absolutely includes propaganda. The military even went so far as to create a mascot called Sivamzinho. It was a little indigenous boy in a comic book that got distributed to over 1 million children. The actual purpose of the comic? To teach Amazonian kids to report informal artisanal miners to the authorities and to happily embrace state-sponsored large-scale industrialization. It's just this striking, almost surreal example of the state using culture to try and force a frontier to assimilate to its own rules. All of this brings us to a really fascinating pivot in this explainer, because if we are willing to battle this fiercely over the most remote, heavily protected jungles on our planet, well, it begs the question of how these exact same expansionist dynamics are playing out in the ultimate remote frontier. So let's look up. Fast forward past the 2010 crisis, and suddenly you have startups, private firms, and national space programs seriously eyeing areas on the moon. Specifically places like the Mare Procellarum, which are known to be pretty rich in rare earth elements. And the crazy thing is, these space actors are using the exact same rhetoric of terrestrial scarcity that we just saw in the Amazon, using it to completely justify off-Earth extraction. The speculative fiction driving this new space race is perfectly captured by perspectives like this one from the China Academy of Sciences. Notice how it makes 2 massive, bold claims. First, that Earth is, quote, really short of these resources. And second, that the cosmos basically offers a giant free-for-all where resources can be used without limitation. But when we actually look at the facts versus the fiction, the whole narrative starts to crumble. Despite the unbelievably massive economic and technological hurdles of going to space, the push for lunar mining is accelerating based on a total myth of scarcity. The reality? Earth is not running out of rare earths. In fact, it's wild to think about, but we currently dump hundreds of tons of perfectly reusable rare earths and old electronics every single year rather than just recycling them. The geopolitical parallels between these 2 extreme frontiers are just striking. Think about it. On Earth, corporate and state actors are battling to rewrite the 1988 Brazilian Constitution so they can bypass protections on indigenous lands. Meanwhile, in space, private and military actors are simultaneously working to subvert the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. A treaty which very clearly states that space is the common heritage of all humankind and expressly prohibits national appropriation. In both cases, powerful entities are actively trying to tear up the rulebook. What all of this reveals is that a frontier isn't just some blank space on a map waiting to be discovered. Not at all. It is deliberately conjured up by specific interest groups to justify the displacement of existing realities. Whether that means ignoring indigenous sovereignty right here on Earth, or attempting to privatize the shared heritage of outer space. Ultimately, the research driving this explainer reveals something crucial. This frantic scramble for rare earths in impossible places, it isn't actually about geology or resource shortages at all. The sources suggest that this scarcity is a constructed myth, basically used as a veil for much broader territorial ambitions. It's about enclosing space so rival hegemons can't get to it first, and redefining laws to assert absolute state and corporate sovereignty over entirely new domains. Knowing that the push to mine these frontiers is truly a battle for geopolitical dominance, we are left with a critical challenge. Whether we're looking at the deepest parts of the Amazon rainforest or the craters of the moon, we have to ask ourselves, as the old laws are torn up, who exactly are we empowering to write the rules of our shared future? I'll leave you to think on that. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the maps you're handed.